I see why that escort order was not an allowable option. I couldn't create a second escort order. It's because, and I had one here, this guy's mission isn't complete. I don't know how long he's been there though. He's been there for a long time. He probably should be. So what I'm gonna do, try to figure out who's who. Yeah, we got Swedes there. I'll explain that in a minute. Yeah, I'm gonna say his mission was completed. I think it was, and I recorded it here. And this guy's just started a new escort mission. And that's over detachment A. So the reason you've got Swedes and Russians both here is the Swedes have a mission to support the army as well. Neither one has auxiliaries that they can search with. So they're just kind of patrolling around on the coast, staying away from each other at this point. I was expecting those Swedes to be up there abusing the Russian fleet. However, the Russians are sending a regular sail fleet out, and that may, although it's had trouble getting out of the harbor, that may be able to cause some issues to the galleys there. I'm a little torn as to whether or not to actually try that, because the galleys are in a port, they have advantages there, but I need to try and gain back some of this, and the only way I can is by winning big and maybe taking some big risks. Over here we see the Russians are beginning to pull back from their position. They're able to retreat out of there even though they have no orders, because they're abandoning their orders, as it were. This is going to be pretty much a null turn as far as things happen, moving as slowly as possible to not accumulate any attrition checks. Over here we've had dry weather all summer, so it's kind of nice. It never got hot and no penalties there. One little piece which seems to be missing from the game, or at least missing from my ability to find it, is the damage effects table. I started looking on the board because I can't find it in the charts and tables. I see in the rules there's supposed to be one. Now, some of these effects show up in other things, but I thought it affected the sailing ability and speed of the ships, but that doesn't appear to be the case. It doesn't show up over here. So unless I see damage effects listed in some table in particular, for example, it shows up on I don't know, on one of these combat tables I saw here, the battle reinforcement. But there are maybe indications here of things. The movement allowance and wind gauge have a modifier. Well, wind gauge definitely does, but, and we have it in here somewhere maybe? Yeah, 2/3. However, I don't, oh, there it is, cool, okay. So, it doesn't look like there's any effect to catching the sail. Yeah, I couldn't find this sucker. Painful. So yeah, that's going to affect the movement allowance of these guys. That's what the effect is there. So I got to kind of keep an eye on that, because this guy's up at, well, he's only at the, that's only at the 1/3. He's not at the bad place. So his movement allowance is okay still. Someone's damaged this thing. That's not good. He shouldn't be moving as fast as I've got him. And that means he's probably going to suffer worse, because he's got to make it home still. Maybe I could find an interim port. These guys don't have any repair capability though, so I got to keep sailing my way, I guess. We did have a little engagement here. The Russian sail went in and attacked the Swedes. The Russians actually lost the fight. And they lost the fight primarily because the Swedes had a fire ship with them, and they managed to get it off, sunk one of the Russian ships, and also did a light engagement and did a little bit more damage. The galleys, and with twice as many as the squadron that engaged, were able to make up for the Russian leadership. It ended up pretty much an even fight, to tell you the truth. The only advantage. The galleys had a slight edge, I believe. I don't know. Anyway, they managed to push the Russians away. Plus, with the fire ship, they sunk a ship, which gives them a point of prestige over on the chart. As we move into the September-October turn, it looks like the fleets are so worn out, I just really can't do anything else. I do have this, I haven't decommissioned things. I have this squadron that I could leave here, but I'm going to decommission them instead. They recovered somewhat, and they'll be here in the mess. That's a 3 down here. And this is an 8. I could have tried to detach a unit, but you know, I just don't think my one unit could do anything. The Swedish fleet here is being stupid sticking around. They should have canceled their order and tried to make their way home. They're in really, really bad shape here, making rolls to see if they lose ships. But they could complete their mission, and that could actually serve some interesting points because the Russian fleet is still operating over here, and it can essentially, well, I don't know. I was thinking I could launch an attack down this way, but this guy over here is not, he's just a garrison, so I'd have to reposition. So actually, the Russians are taking another pass. They know they can't make it through here without Lacey, unless they get lucky and the Swedes decide not to do, again, a defensive campaign. But the Swedes were clever enough to do one. And that really means the Russians would just be throwing away their somewhat, you know, minimalist victory right now that they've got over here if they pushed forward here. If they have Lacey, they can go for it. And they may go for a winter campaign. Assuming the game lasts that long, there's a good chance that it'll just fail right there in September. Other than that, not a lot going on. You can see the Swedes have enough operational points to keep pushing. They may, if they see that the Russians aren't advancing, they may try to turn and make an advance. The problem is they're outnumbered and outgunned in general. They've got lucky with some attacks here. I don't know if they can, you know, without the garrison, without the depot there, I don't know if they can really push forward, especially when they're talking about a stack like this of 3 units. And this isn't the goal. This would be, but if they go up there, they'll be giving this up. They have to push forward there. So, you know, it's just it's sort of this mess that they don't think they can do any good by launching an attack. I was here thinking I would wait for this quarterly turn and get Lacey back. That's not going to work. There was an event earlier. There are random events that come up in the Lesser Wrath. And I've had this 2 years in a row, actually, which prevents, due to a diplomatic insult, it prevents you from making any prisoner exchanges. And I don't remember who got the event, but they refused to pay. You can pay a prestige to avoid it. And clearly, the Russians would pay at this point to fix it if they could get Lacey back. But it's not that. It's one player has that option and they exercise it at the moment and then you're just stuck with it. So actually I'm probably stuck without the Russians being able to act for the rest of the year because it lasts until the end of the year. Now theoretically the game should be over in 1743, but our negotiations haven't been fixing that issue, and I'm not quite sure what to do about that. I guess I just keep going. There's no real reason to stop, except that presumably there would be some further shipbuilding going on as years go on. So I just don't know if that's reasonable. Anyway, I'll look to see if the rules have anything on it, but I doubt it. I think the modifiers are set up in such a way that it's very unlikely it's going to get much beyond that. I think, though, we may be at a standstill because I cannot see how the Russians can get past here without their general, and except by diverting forces. I don't think that that's a reasonable possibility this late in the year. I'm not sure. You see, if I send forces up this way and it forces the Swedes back to defend that, then the Russians could advance and maybe take this final final location. The problem is there's no way that I think from the rules that they can say, yeah, let's make 2 campaigns here. There's no way for them to get 2 formations into that space that I can see. And that pretty much says they can't get it anymore. That's kind of a weird situation because it means the Swedes, who I don't think have any generals who have that ability to command more than 1 unit, because there's no grand armies, can ever really avoid the risk of the blockade being, of the siege being broken automatically. Yeah, I don't know where we are. Well, let me finish this turn, start this turn, and see if we get a piece here, because if we don't, I think we've got some serious problems. Unfortunately for my sanity, hats ended up dominant, which ended up sufficient to prevent the war from ending. And total modifiers, I don't remember what they are. 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 from there. Another 4 here because the Russians haven't gotten very far. It's only a +8 on the modifier table. That gave us a progress result in the talks over here, hitting around here. And over on the Danish table, though, we're starting to see the Danes mobilizing. And as far as I can see from that, I don't think they can actually do anything with mobilization. I looked at the rules for this. I'm really kind of... So first of all, I think they're coming in against Sweden because of the ruler is not their choice. Which I don't feel like the Russians necessarily would be supporting the Swedes here if that happens. They didn't get their choice of people. And now this is not all nicely hammered out in the rules. In fact, where it hits mobilization, Denmark's still neutral. The Danish intrigue modifier is applied. Players must decide which side Denmark's on, allied with Sweden or hostile. 4.113, which is actually just a design note talking about, well, okay, the Danes were unhappy about not having their leader, and the Russians were willing to intervene because one of their choices, well, their particular choice was picked by Sweden. Well, here we have Christian of Zweibrück, who doesn't really support either side. I'm not sure whether or not the Russians would be willing to help the Swedes in this case. It's almost as though, it's a pro-French side of things. So it kind of throws a monkey wrench in the whole thing, and I think the best solution there is to say the Swedes wouldn't, the Russians won't help the Swedes there. And in fact, they're still at war with Sweden. So they certainly aren't going to help. But we don't know where the Danes are going to come. They're not going to be doing anything yet. I guess I'll keep playing it out. I was having kind of a crisis trying to figure out, should I, shouldn't I? Well, as long as the war is still officially going on, I think the Danes being ready to get more involved might make sense. I don't know. It's kind of weird because the Danes sort of got themselves involved after the war, and I'm not sure I want to just play out some Sommerskralla there. So then the question comes to what could happen. Well, we got some possibility for naval action, but I think that's low. I think the rest of this year, the navies are so hosed that they're just going to try to get home and save themselves. We have a fleet here in Riga that can't even get out of there easily. He's going to deploy into Riga in order to get repairs. I haven't finished up my admin stuff. Over on the land phase, I'm committed that the Russians can't go forward, but maybe the Swedes could? Well, who knows? I've got to be careful because if the war does keep going, well, the quarterly turn up here could bring Lacy back into play, and then the Russians could be active again. I don't think the Swedes can really go on the offensive here. They'd love to. they're not far from a victory, from being able to maybe take this to a victory. They have a lot of supply points, but I just can't see them being able to move forward. All right, well, onward we go. The Russians actually called up a naval draft just to get some repairs on the line, and maybe some reinforcement ships called up. They didn't get any additional ships, but the way I handle that is, because there's no rules in effect to translate what the draft would really do over here, and it should be a reduction of manpower. I pulled one regiment out of play, which isn't a big deal at all. I've got troops back here that I can't funnel into the main Russian line, and I don't really need a lot of garrisons back here, so the Swedes aren't putting a big thrust on there. Now, if I had been playing with the troops being handled the way they should, and you can see I'm already accumulating some pretty heavy losses, there would have been a significant number of losses on the board because I wouldn't have had that huge replenishment, and that would actually be a major effect in the game to try to give up a whole regiment in that under those conditions. That might actually be at least equivalent to the penalty that you build up in the Summer Scralla game, which is just a +1 on all die rolls from then on to advancing the campaign. Now, advancing the campaign is not a big deal. In Summer Scralla, it's not necessarily what the Russians want to do. It's an effect of the commands that they play. If they're doing successfully, yeah, they're going to help it advance, and it makes it easier. Advancing the campaign is a job that's easy to do. Supporting these the attacks, supporting the escorting the convoys, stuff like that. Those are easy jobs compared to sailing down here and losing your fleet to the weather, basically. Well, just to being at sea too long, getting stuck without being able to move. So, you end up advancing the campaign, but it's more just an artifact of the actions you're taking that you want to take. All right, well, we'll push into, what is it coming up? Straight out October. Well, I ran through a couple of months or turns rather quickly. I'm at the beginning of the November, December now, mainly because I'm just limping home with this Swede here. The Russians tried to engage him, but the Swedes were able to screen the shadow and get away. They faced this gale running through them, though, or storm, and took a ship loss, not from the storm directly, actually from the turn's attrition. They're very slow now, just one hex or one space per turn. Over there on the main map, nothing's changed. Just some wounded leaders coming back and the like, and really the two armies are recovered pretty much. They've got a long winter ahead of them, but chances are the game's over before I get to do anything again. That's kind of why I'm just speeding through. And as we hit the December-January turn, everything begins to freeze over. We hit the quarterly turn there. What ends up happening is, well, the hats lose their dominance. We're back to a balanced approach. With like +9 to the die roll, it was almost certain. We got the Peace of Abo. I made one final roll at a +1 for the Danes just to see what might happen, because if they got into the escalation, I'd look that up and see if that starts them actively moving. But if the peace is in place and they haven't begun anything yet, I don't think they're going to start it. I don't think it makes any sense. In fact, I think by the time the peace comes in place, maybe they just shouldn't be coming in. So what we have is the end of the game here. And quite simply, in terms of victory, well, it's pretty clear to me the Swedes very easily won over on the Summer Scralla map. And that is not unlikely. They got kind of lucky in terms of getting their best admiral out there quite a few times. Over here on the land map, it's a tougher call. Clearly The Russians have more prestige. I could have, of course, screwed something up there, though, so you don't know for sure. But they were doing much better before this final campaign. If they hadn't pushed further, and there's no real reason for them to do so, they would have been in better shape. They had about a 4-point lead before that. The Swedes definitely cut them down a little bit here. As you can see, though, through my playing of it, even after struggling with the rules, dragging my feet on the game a lot, just moving forward with it, it took me about 3 months to get to the point where, I was set up and ready to play this. And I played each of these once, and even in that, I had a lot of trouble making my way through them. So, take that however you will. My concentration isn't what it used to be, nor is my dedication to trying to put together the extra pieces what it was when I say played something like Europa Universalis, or even La Grande Guerre, which is also a very big, complicated game where you have a lot that you have to keep in mind. But see, the difference here may be a lot to do with the subject. So in some senses, I thought this might be the perfect game, to start off with out of the series, because it's small. But the problem is, it's not that glorious subject matter. And also, of course, facing both of these at once did create more of a difficulty. When I sat down and just played A Lesser Wrath, I felt like I kind of had some grasp of the game. Then when I switched to Summer Scroll, it was much, much harder. And then, not feeling like I completely got Summer Scroll, and clearly I didn't, because, I had these damage levels all set way high. There were a lot of cases, where in this playing, I learned things from the designer by doing this on video. And I know that, he demos the game at cons, and that's probably the best way to pick it up. Just because the rules are a tough slog at the very least. I'll come back to more about that when I hit the review itself. But the fact that I made so many errors, backtracked things, the Russian army here, the armies are almost in completely good shape in terms of almost all the counters are still on the board. That would not have been the case. Real attrition would have taken place. I saw, losses that I was recovering very easily. Well, I could not have continued pushing at the kind of level I did without losing a lot of pieces. So the game would take a different flavor. Maybe it wouldn't bog down to a point where a couple, see, the problem here had to do with coordinating two columns, and there's no easy way to do that without Lacey. Getting Lacey knocked out makes it tough, but that means the Swedes can never really advance on the Russians unless the Russians screw up completely. So let's say the Russian army had gotten its ass kicked here, and the Swedes turned to move forward. Well, that vestigial Russian army could still break sieges, because there's no way to coordinate the Swedish army. It's only one column or army at a time that can be in motion on a particular campaign. So unless you could have two units going for the same campaign objective, well, what does that mean? Do you pay 2 operational points, and then if you make it, you just get the victory conditions for 1, but maybe get penalized twice? Or you certainly shouldn't get the bonus double for making it. So there's a lot of kind of iffy stuff there, and maybe I'm mistaking things. Maybe it's possible to move units without a campaign in support of a campaign. I saw no indication of that in the rules. It seemed to me very clear you assigned a single column, essentially, or the army, to do one thing. And, well, that works fine if you have Lacey and you can command more than just your column. But there's no other way in this game, because there's no Grand Army, of coordinating more than one force So you can't really leave a blockading force. Well, you can't really have an interdiction, a siege going on at the same time that you have this kind of screening force. And although it's not explicit in the rules, there is an implication that if you don't have that screening force in place, if you just have the siege force there, if it gets attacked, the siege is broken. And that's how I've played it. Anyway, that's one thing to focus in on. Other things here, some of the situations where maybe I got a wind move wrong or something like that could have a major effect on the game. I was rolling against the wind and then moving to the short spaces when sometimes it's supposed to be the long spaces. Hard to keep all that stuff in mind. And so I wouldn't take away too much from the story that the game told, although what Ian tells me is, yeah, the story the game told is actually kind of believable, even though I screwed up so much. And there's something there. These war games tend to be resilient. I'm just babbling because the wrap part, I'm not sure what the wrap is supposed to be anymore now that I put a review at the end of things. But I've gotten in the habit of putting a wrap in, and I like to try to discuss what the strategy was. The strategy over here on the summer scroll was kind of opportunistic. Hey, what did I draw? What can I do? Can I get some points? How can I score? And we can see, well, the naval battles ended up deciding it anyway. So, in a sense, you could probably ignore your orders because they only get scored for 1 prestige per year. Whereas if you could really focus in on destroying the enemy's fleet, if you could figure out a way to trap him in his following orders and try to catch his fleet unaware and do damage to it, that's a much, much better solution than trying to follow the orders that you're given. The orders that you're given aren't that important. They're only, and that's kind of cool because you kind of pick them semi-randomly, right? Whereas over here, you really get to decide what orders you're following. You get to decide what you're pursuing. And over here, those orders become a major part of the victory formula for the prestige. Whereas actual fights, quite often, if the Russians are attacking, for example, they'll have a larger army. They're just not going to be able to get many points. They'll get the one for a commander-in-chief, captain general in the battle, but that's all they'll walk away with. So, to a large extent over here, you do really have to figure out what your operations are. But again, that's kind of weird too. Because over here you are trying to defeat the enemy navy, and that's a big deal. But over here you're more worried about what you can do to kind of score points. And the Russians put themselves at a risk and ended up losing a lot of ground by trying to push the campaign further. There's no additional real big impetus for going beyond victory. Of course, that can be said about a lot of games. I'm sitting on Cemetery Hill now. No reason for me to keep pushing. I don't have to break the Union any further once I get that, right? I've won. And there's something to be said for that, There are situations, and this certainly feels like one of them, where limited war might have been the better solution. All right. Up this is going, and then we'll come back with the review.